In this nugget, we'll take a look at the steps to implement Cisco's TrustSec. Let's begin. I'd like you to imagine that you and I want to do central administration and control of access using TrustSec. Now, to do that, to implement TrustSec, there's a few things we have to do on ICE, and there's a few things that you and I want to do on the network access device. In this case, the NAT is our switch, and of course, the ICE server is the ICE server. Now, I set this up, but I wanted to make sure it was working, so it's currently functioning, and I want to walk you through step by step what I did to configure both the ICE server as well as what I configured on the switch. Now, by default, this ICE server is acting as an SGA AAA server. But to verify that, we could go to Administration, and under Network Resources, if we select SGA, Security Group Access AAA servers, by default our ICE server is already on that list. To tell our ICE server that our network access device, the switch, is going to be using and participating with Security Group Access and Security Group ACLs, we'd go to Administration, and under Network Resources, we'd select Network Devices. Now here I have switch number 2, and it's a brand new network access device, and the reason I'm using it instead of switch number 1 is that switch number 2 is a 3750X that supports TrustSec. It's really tough to practice and work with TrustSec if you have a switch that doesn't understand what the heck that is. So switch number 2 is a typical network access device that's doing .1x control on its ports. And then what I did in addition on switch 2, if we edit it and we scroll down to the advanced TrustSec settings, I click this little checkbox that says I want to use the advanced TrustSec settings. And then here I simply specify the password that I want to use between the ICE server and the switch. So whatever we put here for the password, we'll also want to put that same password when we configure the switch. I also click this checkbox that says please notify this device, the switch, regarding SGA configuration changes so we can get updates. The other option I selected was device configuration deployment. So that if we have a new security group ACL on the ICE server and we want to push that down to the switch, we can actually log in and do that successfully by having the correct credentials. Our next task is to create some security groups themselves with some associated tags. And to do that, we're going to go to Policy, and from the drop down, we're going to go under Policy Elements, down to Results, and we have this section for Security Group Access. If we expand that and select Security Groups, by default, we had one security group, and it was the unknown security group with a tag of 0. And I created 3 additional security groups. One I called Security NADs, Security Servers, and Security Users. And it automatically generated these tag numbers of 2, 3, and 4 respectively. Next, I went one step up right here to Security Group Access Control List, and I created 2 access control lists as examples. And if we edit the contents of one of these, I want to point out something very, very interesting here. These access control lists don't talk anything about source or destination IP address. Those are left out. But we can say, for example, deny TCP traffic if the destination port equals FTP, or other types of ports or protocols that we want to. And the reason that the source and destination addresses are left off is because we can apply the security group ACL as traffic is going between 2 different security groups. For example, we could say if traffic is going from security group 2 to security group 3, then we want to apply this security group ACL. This is also referred to as a role-based ACL. So if you see that in documentation or RBACL, they're talking about this access control list that's being dynamically applied based on where the traffic is coming from and going to, based on these security tags involved. Another item that we can do right here under Policy, Policy Elements, Results, and under the Security Group Access section is we have Security Group Mappings. If we want to manually associate a certain IP address or IP addresses with a security group tag, we can do so right here. And I did one mapping. If we open up security servers, I set up a mapping that said if the IP address is 8.8.8.8 exactly, that should be associated with the security group called sec servers. And if we go over to those security groups and look at sec servers, that's going to have a security tag of 3. Now the challenge is, how do we associate specific security groups, which equate to security tags, with groups of users? And the answer to that is we're going to do that through authorization policies. For example, if we go to policy, and from the drop down we go to authorization, here's our authorization policies. So for example, this one right here has the conditions saying if the user is a valid AD user and a member of this group, and the computer is part of the domain, then we're going to use this authorization profile, and we can go ahead and associate at the same time that user with a specific security group, which also equates to a specific security group tag associated with that group. So to add on that security users group, we simply click on Edit, click on the plus symbol, and then click on plus, and you could go ahead and from the drop down select security group and then pick one of these security groups. And that's how this switch is going to know when frames come in from that person. It's going to have a specific security tag associated with it based on the security group that that user is a member of. Now on the network access device, there's a few things that we need to do. And what I thought would be the simplest method is to show you the commands I used, and I'll have this file in the Nugget Lab files as well for your reference. On the switch, we're going to configure a password for PAC. And PAC is an acronym for Protected Access Credentials. Then I created a method list called CTS author list. You can name it virtually anything you'd like. And if that list is called on, we're going to use our radius server. And this switch is currently configured to use ICE as its radius server. I've also specified that for CTS authorization, it should use the method list called CTS author list, which at the end of the day means we're going to use our radius server, the ICE server, for CTS authorization. And of course, the acronym for CTS is Cisco TrustSec. Then I exited configuration mode, and from privilege mode prompt, I specified my CTS credentials with a password of nugget exclamation mark 23. And then there's some show commands that we can use to verify that data. We're going to go ahead and apply CTS role-based enforcement to the ports we want to enforce that on. So for example, if we go over to the switch and we go into configuration mode, and we go into interface gig 1/0/12, that's for example a trunk port that we want to go ahead and enforce our policy on, we can say CTS role-based enforcement on that port. So now if we have policies in place regarding traffic that's trying to flow from one security group tag to another, we can deploy the ICE-defined security group access control list to permit or deny that traffic. And then we have a command that we can use to update the information from the ICE server to our NAD, in our case the switch, as well as verify what that data is. So for example, on the switch, if we do a show CTS credentials, we could verify our device ID and in fact that we had configured credentials on the switch. If we want to look at our protected access credential information, we can do a show CTS packs. So here's our switch information. It's being used with ICE. If we use the command show CTS environment data, this is showing us our current security groups that we know about from the ICE server. Now to put it all together, we need to somehow set up rules to say if traffic is going between two different security groups, then go ahead and apply the security ACLs. And to do that under policy, we're going to go to security group access. By default, it's taken us to the egress policy tab, and then below that, we're going to click on matrix. In this matrix, this column here is specifying the source, and the row across the top is specifying the destination. So for example, if we wanted to apply a filtering policy for traffic that was sourced by traffic that was associated with tag number 4, and if it was going to the security servers, which is tag number 3, we can simply double-click this intersection box and apply the role-based access control list that we want for that traffic. So to do that, we double-click on that box, confirm the details. This is traffic from security tag 4 going to security tag 3. And then from here, we can use the drop down and select our security group access control list to implement the filtering on that traffic. So if we wanted to use the deny ICMP as an example, we could select that. And I'm going to remove this extra one here. And then I'll click on save. So now anytime traffic is going from this tag to that tag, it's going to have this ACL to deal with. Now once we've saved that, the next thing we'd want to do is make sure that our switches are paying attention to it, or our routers, or our firewalls. So if, for example, we had a trunk port, for example, gig 1/0/12, which indeed is a trunk, we could go to that interface, and in interface configuration specify CTS role-based enforcement. And this is where it gets a little bit dicey, because the exact command is going to vary a little bit based on the hardware platform you're running it on, as well as the version of software you're running on that hardware. So to assist with that, you want to grab the exact version of documentation for your hardware and software to confirm what the appropriate command is to implement the enforcement of TrustSec on that port. One additional validation I'd like to share with you is if we go to Policy and Authorization, a user who is authenticated based on matching this authorization rule should be given the access of our authorization profile, as well as be associated with this security group and the associated security group tag. Now currently, I do have an authorized user who has come in on port gig 1/0/7. So if we go to the switch and we issue the command show authentication sessions interface gig 1/0/7, that should verify that we have an authorized individual via .1x. And it is also indicating that we have a security group tag of 0004, which is the group tag associated with that sec users group that we created inside the ICE server. In this nugget, we've taken a look at some configuration that's required on the ICE server as well as on the network access device to implement Cisco's TrustSec that allows us to do security group ACLs based on security group tag numbers instead of having to manually implement access control lists on multiple devices in our network. I have had a great time in this nugget. I'm so glad you joined me for it. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.